We're going to be talking about some big questions that parents are asking around mental health. I want to start with dyslexia. Dyslexia can be tricky to notice in your kids because most kids have some challenges around spelling and reading, and they're learning to do all those things. And so many times you just think, oh, these are developmental maturity issues where they're reversing letters or reversing words or not being able to pronounce certain words clearly or even read them where they're not processing them correctly. There is a developmental component to that. For some kids with dyslexia, what you begin to see is there are clear reading and writing issues that don't go away. They actually begin to worsen. As the demands grow, they're not growing with it. So writing-wise, they're having difficulty pronouncing. The pronunciation of words is difficult for them. When they're reading, they're getting stuck and they're having a hard time reading what's there, which over time begins to create a tremendous amount of anxiety for a child. They begin to compare to others. They don't want to be called on to read out loud in front of the class because then they look dumb. And this is nothing about intelligence. And so if you have a child that is struggling potentially with dyslexia and the things that I talked about, reading and writing and reversing of words and not being able to pronounce words, what you can do is actually get them tested with a psychologist, with a learning specialist. You can go to the school or you can get somebody in your community just to rule that out and to give you a clear diagnosis on that. And I encourage you to do that because what happens over time is that child begins to suffer quietly and begins to assume that basically the words they say is, I'm stupid. And that begins to break down their confidence academically. They begin to say, I hate school, I don't want to go to school. And then you begin to see this intense anxiety to even go to school because they see that they're going to stand out, they're going to be humiliated or embarrassed. And that is one of the number one fears early on for kids in elementary school and especially going into middle school is I don't want to be humiliated in front of my peers because then all they see is teasing or I'm less than or I'm not good enough or I'm not as smart as. And so as they're going through the doors of school, all they see is I'm going to mess up today, and they're just preventing that and trying to find a way to just hide. When a child that has a dyslexic type of perception gets the right help, they begin to learn more and more how to work with that and gain confidence, and also begin to use the tools to train their brain to compensate well and to begin to progress in their reading and writing. As you're going through this process, make sure you're validating your child's way of seeing things. See, a child with dyslexia many times is overlooked at school, but also it's underplayed by parents. They'll say, hey, no, it's no big deal. You're just reversing some words. They look absolutely normal in most things. And so parents tend to lose patience with it and say, why can't you just read that? Here it is. And they begin to push that child to do something that literally neurologically they just can't do. Now, I was talking about anxiety, and this is another piece that is important to consider with your children. Anxiety is a huge thing, and it's wide-ranging, right? You have kids that are showing more obsessive, compulsive type of tendencies. You have kids struggling with panic issues. We're just going to talk about general anxiety, a child that is just generally anxious. And parents want to know, how do I help my child? And how does faith come into that? How do I give them scripture and things just verses to help them throughout the day to challenge these anxious thoughts? And one thing you want to tell your kids is having an anxious mind and having anxious emotions is not a bad thing. It doesn't make them a bad person or a broken person. It means that their smoke alarm, the alarm of the brain is on high alert. So if you think about a car that has an alarm system and the wind comes and the alarm system goes off, it's an oversensitive alarm system that car has. There's not really an emergency, but it's sounding off an emergency alarm, and it was just wind. The more an anxious child can see that their brain is perceiving an emergency when it's not necessarily an emergency, it's telling them it is. And they need to ask more questions. What do I see? Why do I see it that way? Is it really a threat? What am I afraid of? Why am I afraid of that? And as you process those with your child, that's going to be helpful for them. So ask them some of those questions. What is it that you see? Help me see it from your perspective. And as you feel that anxiety, what is it that you see potentially happening? And help me understand why you see that happening. And then if you do see it that way, like something bad is going to happen, it makes sense that you feel anxious. Now, what if that didn't happen? How differently would you feel? So I'll give you 2 things to do with your anxious child. First is talk to them about what they see. Validate that. Okay, just, hey, help me see what you see. And then the second one is ask them questions about it to help direct them in a certain direction. And that is saying, hey, is there another way to look at this? How about we walk towards what you're anxious about so it doesn't have more power? Because see, the tendency is to walk away from it. So what you're doing is validating, but then helping them step with courage towards that thing that's making them anxious. Isaiah 26 verses 3 and 4 says, you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. The Lord God is an everlasting rock. Now realize in that verse, you talk with your kids about that, is you're keeping your mind in perfect peace as you're trusting in God. He's your rock. It doesn't say run away from things. It says he's with you as you lean in towards whatever is making you anxious. The majority of things we're anxious about are not real. Our brain is overestimating what could be wrong or what could go bad in there because it's trying to protect you. But does it always need to protect you? So if a child says, man, if I go in to that room, they're all going to laugh at me, no one's going to like me, and they're anxious, they're nervous about going into a room, they're making assumptions about that room, and you're helping them create a new reality, a new experience with that. So you're validating that must look scary if you think everybody's going to laugh at you. And maybe they have some evidence that a couple people have laughed at them, so they've generalized that everyone laughs at me, and that's a common thing for a child's brain to do. Give them the courage of what can they do as they step into a room where they feel a sense of threat. They can begin to look for people they connect with and step towards whatever's making them a bit anxious. Now, let's say a child has severe anxiety. You get them an evaluation with a counselor. It's a serious thing, and it's something that many times is brain-based. And there can be a dietary response to this. There can be physical exercise that helps with this. There can be therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, internal family systems therapy, all kinds of different therapies that can help with anxiety. And then on top of that, what you can do is potentially find supplements or other things, medication that is helpful for a child if it comes to that degree of the help that they're needing. Take it seriously, validate it, help them step towards it, and then give them the support they need as they're managing it. The last thing you want to do is validate and then run away from the anxiety. That actually makes the anxiety bigger for that child. Kids are self-diagnosing, especially teenagers, young adults are self-diagnosing in the area of ADHD. Actually, it makes sense to me because there's so many people using that term so loosely just because they have a hard time paying attention. But there's so many factors to this topic of ADHD. And I've had clients come in to my practice saying, I think I have ADHD. And I looked it up online, or I heard this influencer talking about it on Instagram, or I saw a YouTube video, and I really believe I have ADHD. The first thing you want to do is, hey, help me understand, why do you think you have ADHD? What are the factors that you see would say that you have ADHD? Inattentiveness is normal for the brain. The brain can be very distracted, and the different factors that can go into that are a lack of sleep. Energy drinks can create a tremendous amount of distractibility in the brain, over-focusing on certain things and distractibility other ways. The anxious brain can look kind of ADHD-ish. The stressed out brain can look that way. The tired brain. I mean, there's so many things that can create a more distractible type of brain. And you want to point teens that are self-diagnosing themselves on ADHD towards the actual definition of this. And that's an inattentiveness in multiple environments that impacts their ability to function. And really, with somebody that has ADHD, has a hard time filtering out any kind of noise. So they have the superpower of hearing noises that most people in the room would not hear. If they're in a classroom, maybe 99% of the people don't hear a certain noise, but the person that truly has ADHD would say, man, do you guys hear that noise, that loud noise? They go, what are you talking about? It's their filter is so oversensitive that they have a hard time paying attention. Or they're the ones that notice so many different things and can't truly focus in to one place, and it's consistent in just in multiple places. And one other ADHD type is that more anxious brain, where they're hyper focused on one thing and they get locked into that and they can't pay attention to anything else. They can't shift the attention. And that's one that Dr. Daniel Amen has talked about in his research around the different types of ADHD. ADHD is very complex to diagnose completely. And in fact, for us as practitioners, we've got to go through certain criteria, very, very specific criteria, from giving tests and questionnaires and deeper tests to our own understanding of the DSM-5 to make sure we're diagnosing that correctly for an individual. It is kind of popular to say, oh, I have ADHD. That basically says I'm a distractible person. ADHD is truly a deficit in the brain where the prefrontal cortex, the front parts that guide everything, motivation, making a sense of things, is completely shut down. This part of the brain is skipping a whole step, and that is, should we do it or not? It's the making sense of, stopping, considering a thought, processing it through, and then making a decision. It's basically a thought comes in, boom, do it. So what stimulants do when somebody takes a medication or maybe they have caffeine, it calms that down because it creates a blood flow to that prefrontal cortex. It gives a little bit more room for them to think and consider and process thoughts. And so what I want you to think about is the physical aspect to ADHD. There's truly a physical problem in the brain that needs to be addressed, and there are multiple ways. There are natural ways, plenty of great supplements out there that can help with that. Exercise is a tremendous help for kids with ADHD, creating great oxygen and blood flow and growth of the neurons in the brain, the neuroproteins. So there's some great benefits from supplements, from exercise, and from food. Diet makes a huge difference for a child with ADHD. The self-diagnosing, the problem with that is it begins to create an excuse to just be distractible. So make sure you press in with that child that's wanting to diagnose themselves that way and making sure they're not being lazy with their attentiveness, but saying, hey, I wonder why you're so distracted. If you're thinking maybe my child has ADHD, find a therapist in your area. You can call our line, and they can point you to a counselor in your area that specializes in this and can give you an initial diagnosis on that. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent or they're automatically going to be put on medication. It means that they're going to get the right diagnosis and the treatment they need to be successful. Hey, if you like what you saw, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We love having you with us. Be sure to leave your comments, and I'll see you again soon.